Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 263 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's also where you can sign up for early notice about my book launch, Be Like the Best. The release is on October 18th, and probably about 10 days before, we're going to start doing that pre-sale stuff. And you'll have the opportunity to pre-order and get some great bonuses. So the book is 50 interviews with top fitness professionals, people like Coach Boyle and Gray Cook and John Berardi and Patrick Ward and Charlie Weingroff, Don Saladino, the list goes on. After each interview is a Be Like, which is basically an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. So I'm really proud of this. I'm pretty pumped for it to come out. So go to ContinueFit.com or BeLikeTheBest.com. You can sign up there for early notifications. All right, today on the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle, got him on from Brazil, spoke about the using the single leg deadlift with golfers and really all athletes, and whether golf is a unilateral or bilateral sport, or whether that even matters. And that got into another discussion about using the Speedsticks, not only for golf, but maybe for baseball and for some other things. So good stuff from Coach Boyle. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, I'm with Rachel Cosgrove to talk about testimonials. We did this with Alan a little bit back a couple months ago, but I wanted to get Rachel's take on it too. For the Functional Movement System segment, Gray Cook Classic, hardware versus software. Just something that really never goes out of date, and I wanted to get this one back on. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson about the problems of coaching are universal. Check out TrainHeroic.com, start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. For the Body by Boyle Online.com, hit the gym with a strength coach segment. Brian Buck, performance analyst at Sparta Science. We're going to talk about their force plate and what tests they're doing with that, and what a force profile is, the value of monitoring and what your data is really telling you, why norms matter, why they don't love the 1RM, do asymmetries matter, so much more to talk about with Brian on this stuff. And it always gets a little confusing. It's great to have somebody like Brian on, who has been a strength coach, been in the minor leagues, in the pros, to kind of then went over to the private sector to kind of clear up some of the confusion. So lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every single day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, coming all the way from Brazil. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Live from Brazil. It won't be live when they hear it, but we just got here. We landed at 8 o'clock this morning. It is now 12 o'clock Brazil time. It's a long flight, but it's relatively the same time zone, 1 hour difference. So we're down here with the Perform Better Brazil people and the CFSC Brazil people. And Kevin and Brendan are here, and Jenny and Ariel are here, and Bob and Diane are here. We got a good crowd. Chris Boyer is here. We got a lot of people.
All right, very cool that all the families can go too. Nice. Coach, let's get to the forum. You posted something from Twitter, which was a golf training thread, and they had been critical of using the one leg straight leg deadlift for golfers, considering that golf was a bilateral sport, and they felt like it wasn't a good choice, which their reasoning really didn't make any sense. So I wanted you to elaborate on this.
Yeah, I didn't. It didn't make sense to me either, to be perfectly honest. I look at that and think, people call it the golfer's lift. When you sink your putt and you go to reach down to get your ball out of the thing, that's what you do. You do a one leg straight leg deadlift. But what I've been finding, and there's been a couple of threads that I've seen where people say, it's not a good lift because it's too hard to do heavy and, it's difficult to maintain your balance. And I kind of look at it and think, I think that's why we're doing it. But I guess you could, like, I watch people and they show them doing like, oh, we do it and we hold on to a TRX or we put our hand on the rack. And I'm like, that, I won't say it completely defeats the purpose, but it kind of defeats the purpose. But it is, we notice it with our middle school kids. It is a pattern that really takes time to groove. But to me, it's like, groove it, go, 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 keep going, keep working on it. And while you're doing it, you can do, I'm not a whatever RDL, a more double leg, straight leg deadlift, modified straight leg deadlift is what I called it in functional training for sports. I don't like that lift very much because I just feel like it puts you in a, forward bending, trying to keep your legs relatively straight under load is just not what you want to do. And I know there are going to be, again, the purists, the weightlifters, whatever, are going to be like, oh my God, here he goes again. And it seems like I was reading one the other, I'll go digress, but it's like, I just think you need to work. You've got to get so that you can execute that pattern and then get to the point where you can execute that pattern under load.
Yeah, and I think another thing to keep in mind, and I did post this on the thread, was for me, somebody who owned a golf facility and dealt with mostly golfers, I dealt with a lot of older folks. And, I think every single one of my clients had some kind of knee issue at some point, and they struggled with any knee dominant exercise. So they were had to be pretty proficient with the hip dominant variations because that's really all I had in my tool bag. And and I think, so that's one thing to think about. And even with the kids that I've been having lately, and even though it's a small sample size, I think they've done an amazing job of learning it. I put it in the warm up. And like you said, I think, it's just because it's hard to teach sometimes doesn't mean you should throw it out. But I think, one thing that I've had a lot of success with is taking the shoes off without, having to hold on to a TRX, et cetera. But I've had a lot of success with that.
Yeah, I think taking the shoes off helps, but just doing it's crazy because, as I said, when we started, like our middle school kids, it is the least favorite thing that we do. Kids, oh no, not SLDL. Oh my God, do we have to do that? But they're getting now we're a couple of years in. We've done 1 million reps, but it's crazy how many people I've encountered it, not just in this thread, but in 3 or 4 other threads where people are saying, oh, our athletes aren't good at it. And I'm like, I get it. That's why you should do it. The other thing they should look at it, and it's interesting, I don't know this guy at all, but Moon Ki Jung. So it's Moon, Kijung 1 on Twitter, has a really good video of the knee mechanics and what happens in knee flexion. And like you said, when you have people that don't handle knee dominant exercise very well, doing unilateral stuff or doing more hip dominant stuff is going to be really good for them. If you go and look at that video, you'll see why, because you kind of see the surfaces and how the surfaces move. It's actually pretty cool. I showed it in the staff meeting the other day. It'll pop up in the Body by Boyle online probably next week when we load that next staff meeting up. We spent quite a bit of time looking at the mechanics of the knee. It's just a really, really good little. It's not. It's an animation, I guess. I was trying to think of what we would call it, and I'm actually looking at it right now. It says multi-body dynamic simulation of 12 degrees of freedom, tibiofemoral and patellofemoral joints during the squat task, including muscles, ligaments, and contacts. It's really cool, but it makes you realize why you can go hip dominant with somebody and you can get hamstrings and you can get a little bit of adductor and you can get glutes, and there's a lot of things that you get. And if you get people who are bad at that, I don't think, like when people say, oh, the balance isn't good, what they're really saying to me is the hip isn't good, because it's not. It's like, and I've had this conversation on numerous times with people. When we think of balance, I think balance has a tremendous amount to do with how the muscles function in unilateral stance. I don't think of balance as kind of like the old like inner ear idea of balance. And if I close my eyes, my balance is worse. I think when people can't do things on one leg, they're showing you that the fine tuning of the neuromuscular system, not that it's off, it's that it's not quite there yet. And that's more reason to do it as opposed to less. And that's why we go back to kind of the Dan John idea. If it's important, do it every day. And that's why some of these things, sort of, lunging and straight leg deadlift, and some of these things are in our warm-ups a lot, because we want to get people in unilateral stance a lot. We don't want to be avoiding the whole idea of, avoid that stance because we're not balanced, is almost saying, hey, let's try to get hurt. Let's try to overpower the system. Let's try to get really good bilateral strength. And then it feeds back into the whole kind of unilateral versus bilateral idea.
Yeah, and of course there was talk about whether or not golf was a bilateral sport, and basically I had posted something talking about with all this technology and all the force plates, etc. Interesting, we do have Brian Buck on today talking about force plates, but basically at address they wanted that weight at about 60% on the back foot, the right foot if you're a right-handed golfer, and then at the top of the backswing it's up to 75% on that right foot. I've heard other golf pros say it should be up to 90%. And, if you're stacking tilt, it would be on the left leg. That's just from me showing you that every industry disagrees with stuff. And then once you go to impact, that changes. So there's that weight shift into 75% or even more onto the left foot. So there is this whole weight shift. So you can argue that it's not a bilateral sport.
It's one of those things. But again, the person who was sort of initiating that discussion, if you watch his videos on Twitter, he is a big bilateral strength guy. And again, it keeps going back to when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there's so many of these people who are saying, I've really gotten golfers better doing all this heavy bilateral stuff. And I kind of look and think, yeah, I think you would. Because I think golfers lifting is good. But I think you could look at it and it's a little more relative, and you'd be able to look at it and say, well, gee, could it be better? And to me, I guess, again, I'm beating the same tired drum, but I just feel like unilateral is always better. My first talk tomorrow is on functional training. And that's really what the whole talk is about. It's just this idea of why unilateral stance matters. And it matters because anatomically, and we've gone through this 1,000 times, the muscular actions are different when you're on one leg. We absolutely, positively know that.
I don't know. It's hard for me to understand sometimes how people don't use some of these single leg lifts, even though, look, I'm not just a unilateral coach. I do straight bar deadlifts, trap bar deadlifts, and front squats with the kids that are going to clean, but I use straight bar deadlifts with everybody. And I can't believe people can't get around this whole idea, especially with all the sports, any running sport, you're on one leg so much. So this idea about single leg strength is so important. And even, for some people just to leave it out, it just doesn't make sense to me. And even if they're not an athlete, look at walking. It's the same idea. So it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that people won't use an exercise like that.
It is amazing but again, it just keeps going back to that idea, but that's the way I've always done it. Mm-hmm. I think that is really difficult for people to sort of step back. And I think that's, sort of what we've been able to do better than a lot of people is be willing to take that step back and say, wait a second, because I always say to people, I was a power lifter. I was a meathead. I was a football strength coach. I was all of the things that I probably rail against at some point. But then I feel like, but I got smarter, but I learned more. And as I learned more, I realized that the things that I was doing, I guess they weren't the best. It wasn't the best practice. It was something that, hey, what we were doing was pretty good. But I try to look at right now and think what I want to be doing right now is the absolute best that I can do for whatever, my clients, my athletes, regardless of who we're dealing with. And I honestly think that other people don't necessarily feel that way. I think they're looking at it and thinking, I want to be doing the things that I like and the things that I'm comfortable with. And I was listening actually to the podcast, the Kevin Carr episode from a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that I realized, I said it to you, and I don't think I've ever said it before, but I said, people have their favorite little bucket. We talk about filling buckets, and people are always like, I have my favorite bucket, and I just like to fill it. And that's kind of the way they are. They don't look at it and they don't think of a system. They just think of the fact that, no, I have this little bucket that I really like to fill, and I've been filling it for a really long time, and it's my favorite bucket, and I'm going to just keep doing it. And in some ways, I think that's it's a little bit sad, because professionally speaking, we should be striving to provide the best opportunity that we possibly can for whoever we're working with.
Yeah, without a doubt, definitely. Coach, you that led to another discussion about the Speedsticks in golf, and basically for anybody that doesn't know, I know you don't know a lot about them. You actually asked Bruce Kelly to write an article about his experience with them. The Speedsticks are 3 sticks, where one is the weight of a golf club, and then there's one that's much lighter than the golf club and one that's heavier than the golf club, and you kind of go through these, swinging them as hard as you can to gain some speed. And there's been a lot of really good anecdotal evidence. I'm not sure what the research is on it. I have no clue. There probably is some good research on it, but people have gotten increased swing speeds. Is this something you think that you would employ at NBSC?
I think I would. If we had more golfers, it's really interesting, because if you look at what we're talking about in terms of seeing sprinting and the velocity and how effective velocity is, that would make sense. You want somebody to increase clubhead speed. How would you increase clubhead speed? Well, probably by trying to swing something fast. So yes, I think based on where I am right now, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And that's why I was hoping that Bruce would write an article, and you just made me realize I just went on YouTube, and I'm actually going to pull up a couple videos after we get off, just to look and kind of see what this actually looks like. The interesting thing is, I'll probably look at it and be horrified by some of it, but I think what we'll probably realize is, okay, there's some way to incorporate this into what we're doing if we had someone who was a really serious golfer.
Well, what about baseball? Would you include that into your training? Because bottom line is these Speedsticks, this whole idea came from a study on overspeed and underspeed throwing. So from a pitcher's perspective, and now, like, obviously if it's working with a golf club, it could work with a baseball bat. What do you think about that?
It's interesting, because I don't like to mess with the pitchers.
Yeah.
I had always thought about, like, the even like the weighted ball, the drive line stuff. I think there's something there too in terms of trying to throw the ball as fast as you can. But that's a little more scary to me, because it's such a delicate system. But I guess golf is too.
Oh, it absolutely is.
I guess the difference with golf is I don't worry about somebody's shoulder per se. Like, I feel like golf is more total body and not so focused, because you do have 2 hands on the club. It's a little bit different. Whereas with pitching, but I think with swinging, there's no question, I'd probably be looking at that and thinking, yeah, we probably need to do the exact same thing. But I got to look at it and see. The other problem that you get into with that is, from a safety standpoint, what does it look like in terms of when you've got people? Because, I mean, I don't know what the number of miles per hour of swing is, but you've got some people probably flinging some, obviously they're not letting go, but there's other things. I need to understand it better, but it does seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is. I mean, TPI has proven that, they've done the kinematic sequences on pitchers, on hitters, and it's very similar to the golf. And that's why TPI has gotten into baseball, into this certification about working with baseball players, working with tennis players as well. And I think, for me, the only issue that I kind of always had with it is I felt like it was starting to get out of my lane and, like messing with the swing, because I do think that kind of speed with the swing can mess with it if you're not being supervised on it. And, it's why one things that I did at 5 Iron Fitness was I said, look, if you're going to do some of this stuff, you got to hit a couple balls right after, because I wanted that transfer as much as I possibly could affect that transfer from whatever they were doing with a skill, some kind of a skill drill, and, transferring it to the actual hitting of a golf ball. So that was really the only issue that I had with it was, am I stepping out of my lane because of the intricacies of a golf swing? And I didn't want to mess with that. So it's definitely an interesting topic. It's something certainly to look more into.
Right. And I think sometimes, like I would look at golf and think sometimes in golf, maybe just going to the range and trying to hit a ball as far as you can might be just as advantageous. Like when I look at the sprinting, when I say sprinting is self-organizing, and I think sometimes if you send somebody out there and say, okay, try to hit it as far as you can. Okay, try to hit the next one further. Because I think there is, and I actually looked up I think you saw that Twitter thread. I actually looked up what self-organization was because someone made it sound like we were using a term that was not accurate. And when I looked it up, I'm like, no, it's absolutely perfectly accurate in terms of if someone hits the ball and it doesn't go as far, they're going to say, okay, what I just did didn't work. And sometimes that, like you said, it might be not swinging as hard. It might be being more relaxed. If you read some of the stuff Derek Hanson's been writing, he's been talking about the fact that sometimes with some people, it's, you're going to get your best speed when you just back them off a little bit and say, relax, don't try so hard. Relax your hands, relax your face. So, but it's almost, you need that kind of guided discovery process of just, hey, do it. Look at the time. Okay, that didn't work. And we've been doing that with like I said, with our middle school groups, we've been doing that and saying, okay, try to run it in 5 steps. Try to push as hard as you can out of the start. And sometimes the kids look, that was slower. That didn't work. It's like, okay, that doesn't work for you. All right, let's try a different cue. Let's see if we can find another way for you to organize your system.
Yeah, I've seen that self-organization with med balls a lot, the different med ball movements where people don't get them at first, but they keep doing them and their body kind of understands and starts to learn it. So it's interesting. It's also where I started to do overspeed and underspeed with med balls. So I would do like a 4-pound ball to start out with, go to a 6-pound ball, and always finish with a 2-pound ball to really kind of just emphasize that fastest throw at the end.
And that's why we went though with the soft toss ball, because I wanted them to throw it as hard as they could. And if you had the bouncy ball, the bouncier the ball was, you could kind of get into a nice rhythm of boom, 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 and not really have to put a lot of oomph behind it. Whereas with the soft toss ball, you got to slam that thing in there to produce enough rebound to get it off the wall, which to me is better. I don't know.
Yeah, and along those same lines, for me, I never had golfers catch that ball on a side throw because for me, it wasn't the full expression of power. They would be so worried about catching it that they would decelerate before they got to that full follow through. And I think, I saw a lot of golfers that would come in. One of their problems would always be, okay, I'm not getting to that left side. So a righty golfer not getting to that left leg, not following through, mostly due to some hip mobility, but sometimes due to a motor pattern. So I had a backstop. So they would throw it and they wouldn't catch it. They would have to look at the wall for a second and the ball would just go to the backstop. They would pick it up. So they would redo it every time. And I don't know, maybe that's just for golfers.
You wonder, is it just for golfers?
Yeah, certainly could be applied to a lot of different sports. So, well, Coach, on that note, I will let you get back to your Brazilian adventure down at the Perform Better Brazilian Summit. Very cool. So, Coach, have a great trip with the Perform Better and MBSC family, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, right now at Perform Better, it's the big summer sale. I mean, you got to get in on this. 40% off, so many items, all of their top sellers. It's the biggest sale of the year. You got to do it. It ends on September 30th, so you got to get there now. Time's running out. Big summer sale. Check it out at performbetter.com. We got the one-day seminars coming up, too. They'll be announced in a couple weeks, but right now, make sure you get down there for that big summer sale.
One of the most frequent conversations we have, whether we're working with clients or athletes or even patients, is the old hardware versus software analogy, because tech devices are going to be part of your life for the rest of your life. And every one of them has a hardware component, the battery, the screen, the computer keyboard, and a software component, the operating system and the programs and apps that you use to run the thing. When you have problems, most of us just turn it on and turn it off. It's called reset. And it fixes a lot of the problems. I mean, many of the problems can be fixed on the fly. Very seldom anymore with our level of technology Is hardware breaking down? And when it is, it's obvious. Even new vehicles, your cars, you're much more likely to have a O2 sensor problem in your car than an engine problem with your car. It's even the sensors that break down. Well, when we start looking at the human body, hardware is your muscles, your joints, your bones, your bone density, your fascial system, all of the hardware that must work together to allow and foster movement to grow and stay maintained with you. The operating system, it's not just in your brain, it's in every sensory organ in your body, your joint receptors, your muscle spindles, the sensors in your fascia. We've got so much feedback coming into the system that when we try to write a movement program, it's not going to listen to what you're saying about the way I should hold my back, because I got 7,000 pieces of information from my toes to my fingertips, to my neck position, to my eyes, my vestibular system, my auditory system. Every proprioceptor and skin tactile sensor is all telling me to do something different with my back than you're telling me to do in my workout. Once again, we're trying to change behavior without engineering or changing perception, amplifying it, magnifying it, doing something. What I'm telling you is, we set up the entire principles and the tools in the functional movement system to be very sensitive to let you know when there's a software problem. How do we know? Well, it takes a long time for tissue to remodel. When we see strength training occur for the first time, you're doing software organization for the first 3 or 4 weeks of that before you ever get any change in tissues like bone density or hypertrophy. That's because most of us can organize a movement situation better if we're moving well, and if we do it often enough to allow for healthy adaptation. Your first adaptation is going to be neural. Your second adaptation is going to be tissue. And so much of fitness is focused on tissue, and we don't have a good neural model. And if we get a great neural model, we'll see that often we can't even line up athletes and have them stand here looking at their structure and predict who's the best. We got to watch them move. And there's a lot of neural going on there. And once you're moving well and running good neural programs, you mold and modify your tissue in a good direction. How many gymnastics coaches have waited, even though your power's there, your fascial system, your skeletal system, and your ligaments aren't tough enough to handle the power you can produce? Muscles adapt quickly. Fascia adapts slow. Nerves adapt unbelievably quickly when we ping them with different sensory information. So with the FMS, our corrective strategy is set up to actually change movement measurably in a single session. Not thinking that we gain strength or power or anything like that, knowing that we just refined your timing and coordination. And under that new refinement is where we want you to develop that pattern. Same thing with power. We see a lot of people with a really, really poor power production in a jump. And we do something neural and then see it go way beyond warm-up. Okay? Let them do the jump and just keep repeating that. That's a warm-up. Do something that doesn't look like a jump, but uses the kind of software, timing, and coordination a good jump should use. 1 session. You see that. When you don't, then you know they've plateaued in their neural adaptation and we can start offering them loads. But when I first see somebody who can't develop power production, I don't hand them a straight bar or a kettlebell, even though I love cleans and swings. I hand them an Indian club, or I get their balance right. I go light and I go fast and let you organize your power. And on that better power production timing platform, as soon as we plateau in our performance, our measurable performance, now we have justified the reason to add loads or move to a next thing that needs to be developed because this is good enough. Making our decisions in exercise should never be done without a test. I've always said this, don't you trust me, test me. Run the principles, run a system that honors them, or just use our system, it doesn't matter, and watch what happens. Most of what we're thinking is a hardware problem in the body, and most of the parts that we like to discuss ad nausea change on the fly. And if they do, the parts aren't the problem. The operating system is. If you see movement change on the fly with a good perspective, a good system, and good principles, you are programming the neural complex. You are not changing tissue. That's going to take 5 weeks to 5 months, depending on what tissue we're talking.
For more information, visit functionalmovement.com.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Let's go.
So I just got back recently from lovely San Antonio, Texas, which is a great vacation destination in August, in case you were wondering. And that was for the NSCA Annual Tactical Training, formerly known as TSAC, which is about tactical training. And tactical athletes are police, military, fire, EMTs, kind of these jobs you need to be physically prepared for that are
could be fatal,
life and death.
Yeah.
But we went as attendees this time, so no booth. And I got to sit in some really cool talks and talk to some really interesting people. Kind of thing I realized is, as much as there are differences, right?
Sure.
If you coach different people in different places, the problems of coaching are more universal, right? Yeah, the problems that these guys are facing are not that much different from anyone else's. They might be more extreme.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
But they're not that different.
Yeah, I think there's a perception out there, Adam, that, a lot of these athletes, operators, as they're referred to in that sector, are, going on these 20-mile hikes or jogs through the wilderness with 50-pound packs on their back through live fire and artillery rounds dropping all around them, which, it is which is part of that, but that's not what they're doing all the time. These coaches are actually coaching these folks very similar to how your athletes or your general population folks, and I mean that in terms of exercises and modalities, but they want to create powerful, strong, and most importantly, resilient operators and athletes, right? Folks that are going to be able to withstand the rigors of their job and their duty, just like you would train a soccer player or a football player to withstand their, needs on the field,
right?
Or execute at a very high level, maximum capacity, as we say. These folks are looking for the same thing. Obviously, the stakes might be a little different, right? But the overall, idea behind the training is the same. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
So, you could be forgiven, right? If you've been in the military or if you had family that were in the military for believing that, hey, the training is basically do a bunch of running and some sit-ups and push-ups
Looks like a PT
and call it a day, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some sit and reach in there. But
I love that.
But, those are, that's the way it used to be kind of, right? It didn't used to be that sophisticated or that big of an emphasis maybe. But what we see is it's a nascent field. So we see the government's hiring a lot of strength conditioning coaches.
A lot of opportunity.
By the way, if you are out there looking for a job and you want to work for the government, there are positions to be filled. So, hot tip.
Yeah. Nice.
But we've got these more serious strength conditioning coaches coming in and really trying to prepare people to do these physical jobs. And the thing is, a lot of these guys, they have a lot of injuries, right? They have, especially when you get some of your more mature tactical athletes who've been around a little bit, who've seen some stuff and experienced some things. Once you get in your mid-30s, you're probably a little banged up.
Yeah.
You probably got something going on.
No question.
But we said that they're not that different, but maybe more extreme, right? So if your star running back gets hurt and can't play on Saturday, or maybe he can play but not as well, your team probably won't perform as well and they might lose. But in a tactical case, somebody might die.
Yeah, totally. And I think the super interesting thing here, Adam, is these folks always, and these coaches always have a sense of urgency. You know what I mean? You never know when these folks are going to have to be ready to do what they have to do, opposed to, if you're setting goals for someone who just simply wants to lose 20 pounds, there's a timeline there. Or if you're working with sports who are in season, out of season, there's a timeline there. These folks have a sense of urgency. They always have to be ready. And I actually like that as a sports strength and conditioning coach. I like instilling that sense of urgency into my athletes. That's something I'd pick up from
I mean, I think it was, I saw it in one talk, Joel Rather is the guy's name, and he's here in Denver at, I think it's Landau North now.
Got it.
But he does a lot of tactical training. He actually works with the NSA quite a bit, I think.
Sure.
But he was talking about periodization, for example. And it's kind of when you don't have a season, right, which I think that just probably rung a bell with some of the personal training coaches out there, right?
Sure.
More gen pops, you don't have a season, right? What are you peaking for? And when you constantly have to be ready, right, you have to be actually prepared to go do your job any moment, right?
Anytime.
What does readiness mean? Readiness means something different in that case.
That's good stuff.
Peaking means something different. How do you peak somebody who doesn't have a single event? It's a little bit hard, right?
Right. That's so interesting to me because I've been obviously brought up through the ranks of having a very defined annual calendar.
Sure.
But now you throw into this, Adam, that maybe we won't know exactly when these folks need to be ready, But now I have to provide them training when they are thousands of miles away. Something we help them do at Train Heroic, but also similarity there between when you're training remote Gen Pop clients or you're training your kids over the summer when they're not in college.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, some of the sport tradition came out of like seasonal training, right?
Totally.
Where all of this came from. But, in some situations it's harder to apply, and this is one of them.
Sure is.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainhook.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with Rachel Cosgrove. Rachel, thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, we had a question come up recently about testimonial videos. And they wanted to know, like, they kind of gave his format, and if I remember correctly, kind of wanted to have himself in it, asking questions and that type of thing. And I think I saw a great presentation a couple of years ago by Frank Nash, actually. Frank was like, man, just call him up on Skype, record it, like have them in their kitchen, make it raw, ask them these 3 questions, and then edit it just so that they're talking, right? Because we want it short and sweet. We don't want all these big intros. But I just wanted to ask you about your best practices for testimonial and how we approach this.
Yeah, and these days in marketing, video is definitely king when it comes to, content. So we have to put content out there, and people love videos. And if you can get your clients on video sharing what you've done for them, I think that's gold. That's just like copying, like that's everything we want in our marketing. So for sure, you do want to come up with some kind of a system to capture your clients' stories. And so first things first is stop thinking of it as a testimonial video. That word testimonial, even if you ask your clients like, hey, can you give me a testimonial? Then they're going to say, oh, Anthony's amazing. He's such a good guy and he's really great at what he does. And so then it's all about you. That's not what you want. You actually want their story. So start thinking of it rather than a testimonial video. Think of it as a success story video or a story, that you're capturing their story. And I think, even just not asking for a testimony, because, as we all know, like if you ask me for a testimonial, I'm going to say all these nice things about you, but I'm not going to tell you anything about my journey.
Yeah.
And then the questions, what you want to think about, we always say, think about, you want to capture their mess to success. So their mess is where they were before they met you or before they joined or, that. So asking questions to find out, where were they? And so, usually a simple question is just, where were you before you joined Results Fitness? Where, how did you feel? What was going on in your life? And getting them to share a little bit about where they were. And so that's going to get some of those, keywords that your target market are feeling right now. Everything from, I felt really, lethargic. I felt really, tired. My body was hurting. I couldn't keep up with my kids. Nothing in my closet was fitting. I was frustrated. All of these really good, juicy words that are going to be the words that your target market, because you're trying to enter the conversation in that person's head that's sitting on the couch feeling the same way that your client felt before they joined your gym. And so the more you can, really get that language, the better. And so when they start sharing, those are the words we want to find here, like, where were you before you joined? And then, so that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is, so what happened once you joined? What were some of your turning points? What are some of your favorite things about working out at Results Fitness? And so then you're getting them to share that you are the answer, you are the solution, and really get some good quotes from them of when I joined, I worked with this coach and they said something to me, or maybe they I learned this, or I learned that it wasn't, I thought it was going to be really hard. It wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. What it was the process like. And so, asking them questions along those lines. And then finally, the third piece that you want to capture is, where are you now? How do you feel? What are some of the things you're able to do that you couldn't do before? And so really getting that, success, right? That, that success story of you being the solution, you being the answer to them going from where they were, which was frustrated, not feeling, healthy, to now, feeling better than they've ever felt. And so that's really what you're trying to capture. You don't really want them to share, Results Fitness is the best gym there ever was, because that's like, it doesn't do anything for anybody. It's just like, it's nice, it's nice to hear. It fills our ego up, but it's not necessarily what's going to really motivate that target client that you're trying to really, speak to take action.
Absolutely. And one of the things, it's funny because like when you look at websites sometimes and they show, their front page and it shows like these almost like fitness models or somebody lifting big weight or no shirt on. And it's like, no, that's what's so great about this story video or testimonial video is that it's actually a person who's coming in. That person can identify with like, oh, that's me. Where they, I love when people put these pictures on that has like nothing to do with your demographic. It's like, no, get somebody who is a part of your demographic, that people that are really coming in, show them smiling and happy on your own page.
So much more powerful. And a lot of trainers make the mistake of putting a picture of them in a sports bra, hey, look how good I look. And, that doesn't great. I'm glad, you obviously have it figured out, which is important. You need to walk the walk and talk the talk. But for most of your target market, that's going to be really intimidating. They're going to be like, okay, I'm not ready for that. So having somebody who's just like them is, that's going to speak to them.
Absolutely. I made that mistake with the bra that I did.
The sports bra. I know. I saw that picture of you. It was just not.
And so on that note, we will we'll let you go. Rachel, thanks so much for doing this, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me. And if you want more information, check out resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
All right, now it's time for the Body by Boyle online.com. Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. All right, today for the segment, I got on Brian Buck. Brian currently serves as the performance analyst at Sparta Science. Before that, he was at the Colorado Rockies. He was their physical performance coordinator, and he worked at the Boris Sports Training Institute. Also played minor league baseball, which is kind of a cool story. He's a Nike master trainer as well. That's where I actually met him. Brian, thanks for doing this.
No, thanks for having me. I've been honored to be here. I've been listening to your show for a long time now, so this is a complete honor for me. So thanks for having me.
All right, very cool. People who listen to the show know that I always kind of, highlight this story of like, I love this, that, you were a high level athlete. You played baseball in college, you played minor league baseball, and then went back to get your degree and basically started working with the Rockies. You got into this piece of it, the sports science, based on all your history, not only as a player, but really working with the players as a strength coach. It's kind of funny. There was a guy named Victor Kiam. He used to own the New England Patriots, and he also owned Remington. This they had these electric razors, and he used to be on the commercials. He was like, I love the company so much, I bought it. It just reminds me, here you are, you were working with Sparta. You were using Sparta Science technology with the Rockies. And then you end up working with them. Just give us a little background about working with the Rockies and how you use this stuff.
Yeah, so, I think really recognizing the problem as a minor league player myself was just kind of seeing the different amounts of training we were doing, kind of a little bit, guesswork on what we needed, how much. And as a young guy, I didn't know any better. So really trying to please everyone instead of listening to my body for the most part. As any young kid is really much trying to do. I dealt with a good amount of injuries myself in the minor leagues. And so went back to school, studied kinesiology, and kind of got back. Actually, I thought I would never get back in the game of baseball, to be honest with you. I was just like, I wanted far away from it. And then ended up getting a shot, learned a lot when I got back into school and did some internships and learned a lot. And kind of found my way back in as an intern. Actually, just before the Rockies, I did one season with the Anaheim Angels as an intern. and learned a massive amount that year of handling a team of guys throughout a season, just understanding it, how I used to look at it from their shoes and how I could better help them get through the season. Things that I would have liked as a player, and then took that over to the Rockies the following year, where basically the first year that I got with the Rockies, they had brought in Sparta Science. That was kind of the big thing that year they were bringing in, and it was new to me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had this opportunity to use force plates and collect some data. And so really, over my course there with the Rockies, I started to learn so much about what I was seeing with the data and how it was impacting the way these athletes moved. And we ended up seeing, a lot of pretty amazing results. And really, so that is where my love of kind of looking at data and how I can individualize programming for athletes and monitor on a better level kind of led me to where I am today with Sparta. So it was something that I got to use, as a strength coach in the trenches, to where I'm like, there's a lot to this. And so it made sense for me once I got out of baseball to join Sparta and Phil Wagner.
Very cool. Now, just give us an idea, because people are going to right away, there's kind of a couple of camps with okay, I'm never using data, then I use data too much, or that I use data and, just to find out, but I don't even really use the data in my training. There's a couple of camps, and people get a little nervous when they hear, especially Sparta, the name of the company is Sparta Science. Tell us exactly, I know you have a force plate, but tell us exactly what you guys, for the most part, are looking at.
Yeah, so good question. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I think we're not a force plate company. The force plate is the needle to draw the blood, so to speak. That gives us the information. What we are is we're a software data company that really helps. We have this large aggregate database that helps provide insight to what's going on, right? So we can look at a bunch of numbers and we can collect data until we're blue in the face. Unless we're really using that data, it's not really do us any good. So that's kind of where people are on either side here. It's okay, keep collecting data, I'm not doing anything with it. Or are you an actual coach? Are you a scientist? Are you a practitioner? What are you? So really, Sparta is trying to help the practitioner that's dealing with athletes every day make better decisions that day.
Okay, so how do you collect that data? It really is it only through the force plate, or is it through other ways?
Yes. So we're collecting, one part of it is collecting the data on the force plate. So through a vertical jump and through a couple of other assessments that we call the balance and the plank. But then really a lot of what we're learning is actually collecting injuries as well. So we don't really know how well we're doing or how much we're improving athletes until we know, how many more games are they playing a year? Are they on the field or court more? For us, that's success. Success is not improving your average eccentric rate of force. That's great and that's fun to talk about in the strength and conditioning circle. But are these athletes actually healthier for longer, and are they able to play their sport? So a lot of what we're looking at is the outcomes that matter, and that is, improving time on the field or court and improving performance at the same time.
So interesting, don't hear a lot about, you just talked about the vertical jump. We all hear about that, but you're also looking at balance and a push-up position plank, not the one on the elbows, right? Well, talk to us about, what those are telling you as well, and why, where, how did you land? Was it always like that? When you were with the Rockies, were you looking at balance and plank, or has that changed? Has it evolved? Talk to us about picking those three and why those three.
Yeah, so the vertical jump is our bread and butter. We have the most data on that. We've been collecting that for the longest time. We've been able to build these predictive models. Essentially, we've continued to see the same type of movers have the same similar injuries. So why is that? How can we dive into that? But then better yet, how can we provide better programming to improve those movements? So that's one piece. And so, yeah, we were using that. We kind of had the old saying with the Rockies was no jump, no pump. Like if you didn't hit the weights until we understood on a deeper level how you were moving, how you were sequencing and all that to better write up better programming. But what we were also using, and I especially took advantage of this my last year when I was kind of our return to play coordinator, was the plank and the balance. And so what we're looking at that, let's talk about the balance first, is we're looking at sway velocity. So you're balancing on one leg, and it's blindfolded for standardization purposes. And what we're looking at is how much medial lateral sway there is and how much anterior posterior sway there is, and really looking at those proprioceptive abilities to really stabilize. And so what that does first and foremost is that gives us a really good baseline metric to look at on how you're able to stabilize and balance on either leg, left and right. And so now from a return to play standpoint, after the injury, we're able to objectively compare to where you were when you were healthy to really validate what we're doing from a rehab standpoint, pushing people faster or pulling the reins on them, because, most protocols are set up based on the average healing tissue time of the average individual. And that's just not the best way to look at it, in our opinion. So really trying to look at it objectively and take the subjectivity out of it. Now, the other one is the plank, and it's essentially the same thing, push-up position. So we're able to compare, upper extremities, left and right limbs. But because of that position, we're also seeing a lot in terms of, how you're able to, stabilize globally down the chain. And what we're seeing in terms of groin and shoulder prediction is pretty amazing, actually.
Very cool. One thing I wanted to ask about as well is, and I know people always ask this for like FMS and other tests, is for the balance, are there shoes on, like, so they're game shoes, right? So a baseball player, or use their cleats or whatever, or is it their training sneakers? Or is it going to be barefoot? And same thing with the plank. How wide are the feet? Are the feet going to be together? Is it always the same, to kind of make sure we have that validity?
No, great questions. So balance, we're looking at barefoot because we're looking at that center of pressure. And looking at how much sway you're actually getting. So really not having those shoes on is key in that one. And then from a standardization standpoint on the plank, you're just looking at feet as wide as you need to effectively do the assessment, and then obviously repeating it each time. And that kind of brings up a good point too, is, standardization is huge, or otherwise you just can't compare the data and it could be bad data. So, from the vertical jump standpoint, there's a standardized warm-up that everyone does before they complete the test. So we're looking at all these things, and there's buzzers actually in the force plate too. If you're doing things incorrectly, half your foot's off it or anything like that, it's going to buzz it out. And essentially what that does is it keeps the bad data out and the good data in. So there's a few rules you got to follow, but other than that, it's fairly practical to get done. And I think that's one thing that our partners continue to see.
Right. I know in one of the articles, I think it was the value of monitoring and what your data is really telling you. You talk about your movement signature data. Number one, I want you to explain what that means specifically, and it's going to help monitor readiness or fatigue. Is that, are you looking at all three? Or are you looking at just vertical jump for readiness and fatigue? That's what I wanted to know. Yeah.
So the beauty of the system is that you can use it how you want. So not every team or organization or individual uses it the exact same way. So we have some people that are collecting daily and they're looking at just that kind of that readiness, fatigue. And so we're really looking at all of what you just said. We're looking at all three, but we're also looking at jump height. I think a lot of times we can tell, people will use jump mats, in similar fashion. We're looking at jump height for sure. And then we're also looking at, okay, what kind of force are you producing? So when the athlete comes in and they're feeling good and they're potentiated, if we're looking at that average eccentric rate of force, we're able to see, okay, are they putting a lot of force into the plate and how quickly are they doing it? So really looking specifically at average eccentric rate of force and then what we call concentric impulse or drive. And that's really force duration over time. So if I'm feeling good, I'm putting in a lot of force quickly. And if I'm dragging or if I'm fatigued, from a nervous system standpoint, a lot of times we're seeing lower force production, but also a lot longer time to do that. And a lot of times that tells us where the athlete's at that day. Their ability to produce force quickly is not there or it is there, and that might dictate the kind of load I'm going to go about using that day.
So interesting. It's so that leads me to the next question, obviously. And when I looked at some videos, it looked pretty easy to use. I mean, it looked like something that could be like from a setup perspective, from like the guys coming in and the ladies coming in, just kind of boom, going on it, doing a couple. It looked really quick. Talk to me about that piece of it, because that's always a big argument, because we want to, you're looking at doing this, more than just, I forget what you guys said. It's should be more than just every semester or quarter. You're looking at this. How easy is this to do? Number one, and how often do you do it?
Yeah, so all great questions. I think practicality is the biggest piece of it. I think, we're busy people. We got a lot of athletes, some of us. And so I remember some, testing days were my least favorite days as a strength coach back in the day. It's like, I hated doing a whole day of assessments. And, when was the next time we were going to assess? And the players hated it. We hated it, or at least I can speak for myself. Those are my least favorite days. I wanted to be training. I didn't want to be testing. So the practicality piece is huge. Essentially you can do the vertical jump and get your assessments done in under a minute. So a lot of our partners are actually just putting it on the workout card, your 6 Sparta jumps, and the athlete's able to select their name, on the computer or the iPad or whatever it is, and kind of knock that out on their own while the coach is coaching. So from a workflow standpoint, putting it into your session or making it a part of your daily, warm up or whatever it may be is fairly simple. And that's the thing is like, we talked about physiology changing, more than once a semester. And those people that are looking at it from a daily standpoint are seeing our physiology and nervous capabilities changing on a daily basis. So if we're only assessing once or twice a year and throwing it back under the desk, I mean, what are we really looking into? So how often should you test is another question people ask a lot. It's really as often as you're willing to make changes from the data. And really that's the important piece of it. There should be a plan of action, each time you use and assess. So if I'm just collecting, I think there's a couple things. One, the individual or athlete feels like a lab rat because they're not necessarily knowing what's happening with that data and how it's impacting what they're doing. And so a big piece of, how we used it with the Rockies and what we do at Sparta is we're assessing them. We're having a brief conversation about what we're seeing as far as force production and force and velocity and looking at all that. And then we're going to tell them what's likely to be in their program and what quality that's going to be working on. So really, yeah, assessing is great and assessing as frequently as you want, but there should also be a plan of action from that. And that's really another big piece that we offer is kind of the research behind what movements improve what variables and what we've seen from that and how we've seen decreases in injuries. So there's always going to be a plan. And I think planning is just as important as assessing if you can't be doing just one.
Interesting. Now, could you just give an example, like a case study almost of, a time when you saw something and you had to make an intervention, like you're just saying, like, this doesn't mean anything unless you're making that intervention. So tell us, something, like you did a vertical jump and then you saw something and then you said, okay, no, you have to go, we're going to do this, this, and this because this is what happened. Give us a little mini case study.
Yeah, so we see stuff like that all the time, and the huge value of monitoring in season was like making tweaks in a program. So just like a simple example of ways that I've used it in the past was these pitchers would come in and assess for me. And a lot of times I'm seeing that load to drive ratio change. Like I told you, a lot of times we'll see force production down and impulse go up. And actually what we ended up seeing from that was a lot of more elbow risk, because you're using now more momentum to produce force as opposed to pure eccentric rate of force, or that lower half, so to speak. So tweaking volumes and training load and or conditioning work was a big piece of that. So if I saw force production dip and more momentum use, I was going to tweak their conditioning first. So that would be something where I would either cut out conditioning or cut out their sprint work, or I was lowering their volume in the training facility to essentially get their legs back underneath them to bring less of a risk. And then, so that's just kind of how we would use it from that standpoint. And like other things, we would see a lot of times it creates a better conversation. So we're always used to athletes coming in, hey, how'd you sleep? How you doing? How's everything going? What's the athlete's response pretty much every time? I'm great.
Good,
I'm good, coach. Everything's great. We know that's not the truth. So a lot of times we see, things, we call it the neuromuscular snapshot. We see a lot of things from acute changes in sleep or stress. It all impacts the way we move on a daily basis. A few things that we've seen from a lot of our football partners, actually we'll see certain variables spike. So one of them, like, for example, load and explode, your average eccentric rate of force and your average concentric force, we'll see those spike and we'll see that impulse dip. And what we've seen from that is just this athlete is not going through a full range of motion to do this jump. So oftentimes something's bothering them physically. So they're just trying to get through the jump because you asked them, but they're really not going through a full range. And a lot of times we've seen guys who have been hurt that are just trying to get through what you're doing. So a lot of times either there's something going on or it's going to create a better conversation between practitioner and athlete to say, hey, what's going on? I know where you trend on average, and here's where you are today. Why is that? And a lot of times, because it's an objective piece of data, the athlete kind of spills it, or the individual will kind of say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, or this is what's going on. And I'm not looking for that necessarily, but it creates a better conversation and therefore a better plan.
Love it. Brian, can you just explain to us data for dummies, impulse? What exactly are you meaning when you say, you've said that a couple times now, impulse? What do you mean within your product?
Yeah, so it's really just force duration over time. So how long can you apply force for? Now, that's not to be confused with being slow. I think essentially you want to apply force for a longer period of time, and there's a lot of positions or sports that there's a benefit to that. You really want to be in a sweet spot. So let me give you an example. An NFL running back or your typical extremely elastic individual that is just booming, you're really good athletes. They produce force extremely quick and a lot of it, but a lot of them don't apply it for very long. And really for a couple of reasons. One, the stimulus of their sport doesn't really call for that, but it doesn't mean that they're not at risk. So because they don't apply it for very long or very efficiently, we tend to see a lot of soft tissue injuries from that short, choppy burst without very good quality of movement. We see more soft tissue. On the other end of that, a good example is a baseball pitcher who wants to apply force for a longer period of time into that mound. The longer they can apply force into that mound and really produce a lot of force, that's going to help dictate the pitch. The sooner I leave the rubber, I'm done producing that force. So there's certain athletes that you want to see a higher impulse or drive, and there's certain athletes that just won't have nearly the amount. But we kind of want to stay in a good threshold or a good safe place to where there's not a high risk.
Okay, so that is going to also tell you, because you're only using a force plate. So when you talked about whether they were using momentum, because you don't have any, like, for example, in like some of these 3D, some of this 3D technology, you have the sensors on your wrist, on your shoulders, whatever, elbows, knees. How are you telling that they're using more momentum?
Yeah, it's basically by time on the plate. So if we're looking, usually, obviously you can tell by the eye as well, but looking at overall time, what it tends to be is when that load drops and that impulse or drive goes up, it's a lot more hingy of a movement, less front side flexion and overall, positive shin angle, and a lot more vertical shin angle and hinging and swinging the body through. So that's what we've seen. And so now from a pitching standpoint, if I'm using more momentum to produce force, that's going to be more of a ligament risk on the elbow. If I'm not using the legs nearly as well to push off the rubber, I'm still going to figure out how to throw 95, but how my body sequences to get there is a different story. So what we ended up seeing over time with the Rockies is that you were actually at higher risk of elbow injury when impulse went up, meaning you were fatigued, you were still trying to throw gas, but you weren't necessarily getting it from the lower half. So if I could manage that in season and keep their legs underneath them to produce more force via the lower half, we're going to see a lot less upper extremity injuries. So that's really like, well, how can you say you look at, you're seeing someone's more at risk for upper body injury from a force plate? Well, everything starts from the ground. And so that's how we're going to look at, force production from the ground up.
Love it. Yeah, it's so interesting to be able to look at some of these things and see, other things that are happening. Now, I wanted you to talk a little bit about 1RMs and why, there might not be the best things besides what you were just saying, like, everybody always hated those days and set up and figuring everything out and getting to it. And it takes so long, but there's other reasons why this type of data might be better than the 1RMs.
Yeah, the 1RM, it's sexy. It's fun. Those days are actually fun. If I were to go back, I'd say I actually love those days, but it's just it's slightly risky. And I don't like saying that because I like to train. I like to get my hands dirty. I like to put the work in. And I think a lot of coaches feel the value there too. I just think, it's often our bodies change so frequently that judging their 1RM based off a percentage that you tested, however long ago, and thinking that they're still going to be on that same level, again, a little bit risky. I think we look a little bit more off body weight percentage and looking at where they're at, relative to body weight, how they're feeling, and all the fluctuations. So really taking into account how much is changing over time and how we want to effectively assess an athlete. And, strength is strength, but, always thinking that we need to improve a squat or a deadlift for a greater gains. That doesn't mean we're moving better. I think that's what I think as a strength conditioning coach, and I can speak on it being a former strength coach, I think always looking at 1RMs as improving them is making me successful, I think is far off the truth. I don't think that means anyone's moving better. I don't think getting from a 500-pound squat to 510 means I'm a great coach. They could be compensating in ways I'm unsure of. They could be, you name it. There's a lot of things. So getting obsessed with just weight that we're pushing or pulling really isn't the end goal. The end goal, again, is those outcomes I talked about as, more games played, staying healthier and moving and sequencing in a lot better way.
Yeah, and for sure, like you said, I think in the article, you could just go on YouTube and look at the different deadlifts and squats and benches, and they're so different. Everything is so different, and somebody's numbers are obviously going to be, it's really not going to be a good indicator or predictor for anything.
Yeah, and if you look at it's huge right now on social media, right? Is all the schools they're really showing off these days, right? So you're seeing, if you go on your Twitter feed, you're seeing those days when there's 40 guys crowded around the one guy squatting, and it's like a big day, and like don't get me wrong, that is fun and that gets the team bonding and it should be fun and we should be working for that. But again, I think assessing movement holistically is what we started to do with the Rockies, and things that I took away from that was like more is not always better as far as moving more weight, but can we objectively look at how you're moving better? And when that improves, we saw a lot less injuries. And again, that's kind of why I moved over to this side of it, professionally, is like there was some merit to what we were looking at. There's a lot of variables that go into it, but frequently assessing and looking at things objectively instead of, well, I'm a deadlift guy and all my guys are going to deadlift regardless. It really helped us to apply better programming based on specific needs.
And Brad, what if that need is strength? I mean, how do you tell with just really these, because you're looking at other things, you're looking at movement, you're looking at, how do you know if it's a strength, if that bucket isn't being filled?
And sometimes it is, and sometimes it is strength. Look, a lot of that, how are we going to impact, average eccentric rate of force? A lot of times it's getting under a bar. It's moving heavy weight, and we're not scared to do that. In fact, that's one thing we did with the Rockies that I was pretty proud of, is even late in the season in August, we're doing triples and we're doing clusters, and guys were pushing some weight, but the volume was kept pretty low. And guys just stayed strong for longer. But a lot of times when we see these force variables down, man, we got to get stronger. We got to pull heavy weight. We got to push weight. But a lot of times what we're seeing is that there's other qualities that we're missing on. We're not seeing this impulse or time it takes to produce the force. We're not looking into soft tissue work as much. So there's a lot of things, and it's not always, and what I've seen over time is, it's not always what you're adding in. A lot of time it's what stimulus can you take away? And that's improving how the athletes are moving. My example there is, the offensive lineman that goes and squats 200 to 300 times in practice. And then we go in the gym and we squat him some more. And his ability to produce force is there. It's not going to go anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't need to squat, but there might be some other variables or some other movements that we should, put at the top of the list than just improving his brute strength, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Brian, what I want to kind of go into asymmetries, and you guys actually had an article on this, and obviously we have the functional movement screen always talking about kind of correcting asymmetries, but there is a time when we do have righties and lefties, golfers and pitchers and, hitters and whatever. And we need it. But so it's always been a good question about, should we kind of play to that strength or should we go to the other side? Just talk to us about what is necessary specialization and functional asymmetries.
Yeah. So this is kind of a hot topic right now. And I think it's, there's so much comparison left versus right and these limb asymmetries. And I think the question should be how much we really look into that, because if you're, looking at the overall body of research, we just haven't shown that functional asymmetries have a consistent relationship with performance. You'll look at a lot of the work out there and it's kind of inconclusive. Always looking at left versus right. And a lot of times it's, a lot of the research will show that it's task dependent as well. And what I mean by that is, if you were to squat on a force plate, we might see right leg dominance. And if you were to jump, we might see left leg dominance. And that's going to consistently change on the trial. So how much thought and weight are we actually giving this? Yeah, and you brought it up as well, as I think humans are naturally asymmetrical. With throwers and bowlers and jumpers, a lot of times that asymmetry is actually beneficial for what they do, and it actually sometimes makes them, elite at what they do. So if I'm assessing, does that mean that I should change something to make them symmetrical? And the better question is probably how. How do I do that? And I think that's, far less known as well. So, I think in general, we kind of thought, and I've always thought that there's got to be some symmetry involved. But just as the body of research grows, I think we're just kind of left with more question marks. So how much do I really want to keep looking into this? But I think it goes back to collecting so much information. And when we're collecting and we're kind of drowning in these data points, I think one thing that we consistently look at as like, I can understand this, is left and right. Some of the other variables, I don't necessarily know what that means if I'm looking at 100 variables, but left and right, most practitioners will, well, you know what, I see a difference and that needs to be fixed. So I think, we still look into it. I mean, we're still going to assess it, via the plank and the balance. But what we've seen to be a lot more meaningful over time is really force asymmetries, more eccentric to concentric than actual limb asymmetries.
Interesting. And so those force asymmetries are something that you are going to look to attack, more, instead of looking at, okay, then, there might be a difference between left and right.
Yeah, totally. We're going to look at those force asymmetries and how you produce force from the ground up and attack it with the research and what we've seen to improve those specific variables. Certain trends we see, and like, again, when I go back to my baseball time, a baseball pitcher, we're going to see a lot more laxity in that throwing side and a lot more stiffness on that landing leg. Does that mean I should change the way they train or improve that weaker side? I mean, no, a lot of times that's what the sport demands, and that's what they've done. They've played the game their entire life. So, to naturally think that we need to correct them could actually be doing a disservice.
Yeah. What about, I know Titleist talked about this, they found that the best golfers in the world, like, let's say they were righty, that they did things lefty growing up. Like, let's say, they played hockey lefty, but they're righty golfers, or there was always something that, not saying that they were ambidextrous, but there was always something that they did on the other side, not to balance it out either. And I'm kind of butchering this a little bit, but we've also seen some other things, like Vern Gambetta had a great article on, you should throw on your opposite arm in warm up just a little bit, just to get it going. There's some neurological advantages to that as well. So, being a baseball player, what are, like, just take out all the data for the moment, I guess. And being a baseball player, did you feel like, that could be beneficial, or would, you personally, do you feel like, yeah, I'm going to work on this strength. I'm a righty hitter. I really want to focus on that way. Or should I practice a little bit of lefty hitting?
No, I think there's a lot of merit there. And I think back in the day, I remember, I think I read about it with Cressy doing it a long time ago of, med ball throws on the opposite side. If I'm a right-handed hitter and the consistent stimulus that I'm getting is swing, swing, swing all day, maybe doing something the other way, can potentially, lower that discrepancy that I have of imbalance. Right. So I think that's kind of the mindset. I've done some of that myself and would kind of feel better about it. I think I think the repetition, and we could go down a rabbit hole on this one if we really wanted to on sports specialization, and we won't do that for time's sake. But the constant repetition over a number of years of doing the same skilled movement is going to have its pull on the body over time. Where can we even that out somewhat? Where can we provide another stimulus? Like you said, some of these golfers are doing. I think there's merit to it. I don't know the exact answer. Again, don't know the extreme science behind it, but I do think there's something to it, being able to do things each way and at least throw a little bit of your training. And that being said, I think, again, like as I talked about with exercises and planning, there's good doses of medicine and there's bad doses. And what we've seen oftentimes is what you can take out that's going to have more of an impact. Meaning, if I'm a right-handed hitter and I'm constantly doing, right-handed med ball throws as well, that's adding to that stimulus. Where if I can take that out and just do the other side, I think there's going to be something to that as far as the overall stimulus I'm getting over a competitive season.
Yeah. I think that's a question I don't know if we're going to be able to really ever truly answer, but it's definitely interesting. And I think as we move forward, like you said in the article, the ability to take action on this data will likely be limited by the ability to explain it to those who matter most. I think that's part of the barrier right now is this trying to understand it. So we appreciate you coming on here and trying to help us sort through some of the lingo, and you're doing some great work. So we really appreciate you coming on and talking about some of this science.
No, this has been a blast. I really appreciate you having me on here. Like I said, I've been listening for a long time, and this is great for me to be on here and chat with you as always, man.
All right, that's going to do for episode 263 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days just to buck. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your 3-day trial. Special thanks to Chris Parrier and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember the big summer sale, 40% off so many items. Guys, it's ending on September 30th, so get over there. Check it out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Brian Buck for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com. Start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Editions. Thanks to Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business and Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Greg Cook and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name's Anthony Renna. Don't forget to sign up for early notice about my book launch, Be Like the Best. It releases on October 18th. You'll have the opportunity to pre-order and get some great bonuses. The book consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros. After each interview is what I call a Be Like, which is basically an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. You can go to continuefit.com or belikethebest.com to sign up. All right, that's going to do it. I will speak to you next time.